Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Smarter Campus podcast, where we are changing education one conversation at a time. Today, I'm lucky enough to be joined by Austin French, a workforce development leader, outdoor industry expert, and co host of More Than the Outdoors podcast, as well as the director of career pathways and employer engagement at the University of Maine, Farmington. Austin, thank you so much for being here. If you could give a little more intro, we can jump in.
Perfect. Yeah, no, Zach, really appreciate you having me on the podcast. I think this is going to be a really fun conversation. Yeah, so like you said, full-time director of career pathways and employer engagement here at the university. But I also teach in our outdoor recreation business administration program. And so that's how you and I kind of initially got connected, and I think when I'm not at the university, I also still work in the outdoor recreation economy in Maine, still heavily involved in the ski industry in particular. And yeah, like you mentioned, all of a sudden, about a month and a half ago, I was like, "Hey, I think I'm starting a podcast too." So, all kinds of fun stuff going on.
That's awesome. Well, Austin, I know you're kind of a AI expert, AI user. Could you tell us like how you kind of got into that as an outdoor specialist, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so funny, right? Because no one thinks AI when you think outdoor industry, right? Like those
Yeah.
things don't connect, and usually most of the time, it's a lot of people being like, take the technology away from me so I can go be outside and like listen to silence. You know what I mean? So I think a lot of it for me was, I am someone who is very interested in being involved in a lot of things all at the same time
Yeah.
because I have a lot of passions and I want to stay involved with them as much as possible. So I think for me, like in terms of my AI journey, if you want to call it that, a lot of it just came from if I wanted to continue to say yes to things, I had to figure out how to get hyper efficient
Yeah.
and really figure out like as I'm doing all these different things and meeting with so many different audiences and trying to get really high quality information across. The only way for me to do that is to get really good at the tools that I have. And admittedly, I will shout her out all the way from the rooftops that like Paloma Shelton, who was one of our previous students here at UMF, was certainly like a major charger in terms of like getting into my office very early on in the process and just being like, if you haven't looked at this, like look at this. And so that's kind of where it all came from.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a very interesting concept. Big shout out to Paloma always. So the thing is like a lot of teachers, right, kind of struggle to listen to students, right? I mean, this is one thing where the teacher and student kind of play a cat and mouse game. So like, how did you kind of receive that? And then what were the steps taken after like a student came to you with AI?
Totally. Yeah. I think, one of the most interesting sort of perspective moments that I had around this was, for us at the University of Maine at Farmington, we were way back in 1864 and still very much so are an education like preparation school, right? That's a large majority of our students are education majors who are going out and going into the teacher workforce. And so a lot of it for me coming into more of a traditional teaching role compared to all of the outdoor education that I did previously to being in the classroom, it's how am I making sure that I'm preparing my students in the best way possible for the business environment that they're about to go into? You know what I mean? And so if I'm such a firm believer that if we're not here teaching them how to use these tools effectively, ethically, and efficiently, it's going to put them behind in some way, shape, or form when all of a sudden they're an application or they're one of the interviews for insert job. And the outdoor recreation economy is not like something that can just avoid that. Like it's part of the game, and it's only continuing to be a larger part of, how are you able to deliver things in the workplace?
Yeah. And I mean, one thing that I think is really cool about your story kind of is like you said, you do a lot of different things and you needed to learn how to do that efficiently. Like where have you seen kind of AI help with that, right? Being able to do outdoor teaching, managing a department, all those things.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I know I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but so much of it is, a lot of the projects that I'm working on, I'm very fortunate to be involved in so many things that are at a very high level, whether it's specifically at the university or now at the state level, with the Outdoor Recreation Hub of Excellence project that I get to call myself the project director for. Um, when you have those types of things, you are speaking to so many different audiences.
Yeah.
Um, and most of them are not even remotely as involved in the project as you are or your team is, right? So the most valuable tool that I have ever utilized is just something as simple as like being able to put together executive summary dashboards for a variety of different audiences, right?
Yeah.
Because oftentimes the things that we are trying to do have so many little details, and it's like I can get into them if you really want me to, but for me to just get you this information to start, like that's a great opportunity. And building those prior to AI, I mean, it's hours, if not days, of like trying to sort out like what is the exact information that I want to put and what's the order that I want to do it with, and then how do I have to then change that depending on who I'm actually sending it to, So for me, that's like time saver number one is just that type of thing. But then also like integrating different pieces into whether it's my email, whether it's my calendar, like just all of those small little things that don't add up to a ton of time by themselves, but when you collect them all together, it saves me so much time in a given
Okay.
week.
So like then I work with tons of faculty, teachers, people all over the world all the time. And like I think the number one mistake, right, is that like people think that they can just use AI and then just like do this giant change and their whole life's going to change immediately. And I think like what you just said is really interesting how it's like you took a specific problem, you used it to translate information to other people. Like how would you recommend people kind of taking those like bite-sized chunks to go at it?
I think probably one of the best ways to start to explore like very small versions of it is similar to I'm sure a number of your audience members already. A lot of the ways that I use like ChatGPT as an example currently are reverse engineering prompts where it's like series of things where here's the big ticket vision. I'm trying to figure out the implementation plan for all of that, and I feel like I have a good start of where the information kind of lies, but I'm sure I'm missing something along the way, right?
Yeah.
And so being able to just work through that process of like, give me one question at a time with very specific details that you're trying to get from me. So that way I'm still running through the critical thinking process. So for all the folks that, one of their largest concerns, I'm sure, is like, well, we're just turning it over to the robots and, they'll do all the thinking for us. Like, all of that thinking is still happening through me. And now I have that entire thread that then when I get to the bottom of it and I go, okay, great, I think this gives everything I need. Now give me the executive summary. That's using my time and my knowledge to the best way possible. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I would say that's something that it doesn't cost you anything to do. And realistically, you can do that in 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So just start there.
I think it's super cool. And one thing that like I like what you're doing, like I'd like you to dive into this a little more. You kind of touched on at the beginning that like you're communicating with lots of different folks, right? Outdoor people, like the one thing is like people often think if you're not a technology expert, you can't use AI because I like to go chop trees down in the woods or something like that. If I'm a diesel mechanic engineer or something like that, I'm not going to know how to use this technology. Like, where have you seen people kind of grow in that, right? That didn't think they could use it, but now are using it for things.
Yeah, I think probably one of the greatest points that I have seen is it very much so takes us from a space where information is the most valuable tool to now context is where we win. You know what I mean? And I think regardless of the audience that you're talking about, if I was to use the students as an example, like one of the sort of equations I talk to them about, whether it's in the classroom or whether it's looking at internships or career steps, is you sort of have this like you have the information that you're going to collect through your experiences in the classroom. And then you have the context when you're going out and doing the internship or that summer job or whatever it is. It's only when you combine both of those
Mhm.
that now you have knowledge that you can act on for all of your future decision making that's going to occur. And so I think one thing that AI absolutely does is it unlocks a lot of the gates, so to speak, around that information. And it allows us to now greatly increase our volume of how many experiences can I do to create the context. So that way, then everything from there is pattern recognition. You know what I mean? Because that's problem solving at its core.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, it's one thing I always talk about. Like, I call it weaving things together, like kind of like a weaving engineer now. It's where it's like you can kind of use AI to answer the things you don't know so that you can like perform on the thing you do know more effectively. So like where have you seen, like obviously you're teaching your students about this and stuff like that. Like where have you seen growth within people that were kind of hesitant at the beginning?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most interesting parts, and I can dive into the class that I'm teaching this semester a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, you know, one I would say is sort of the biggest fears in education when it comes to AI is
Mhm.
like, well, my students are just going to have it write their paper for me, and like, how am I supposed to know that they're actually consuming the information and that they're going to walk away from the class with it?
Yeah.
And so, how I decided to structure my class this semester is that they will only be assessed based off of presentations that they actually do um, in the class. So they'll still have a written component that they'll submit prior to presentation day. Um, but there are one, two, three, four, five, six different presentations that they'll do as sort of like milestones towards a semester long project that they're a part of. Um, and I've told them right from the beginning that like when you submit that written report, please understand that I have given you unrestricted access to AI. I am going to ask you very specific things about what is written in that report when you're standing up at the front of the class. You know what I
Yep.
mean? Because in the business world, no one has an issue that I use executive summary dashboards to be able to get information to folks from all different places. But when they ask me a question in person, I gotta be able to know the answer and live by whatever is on that piece of paper. You know what I mean? So I think that's probably the most valuable lesson I would say in terms of how I'm trying to integrate it into my classes is I know they're going to use it because I use it, and
Yeah.
I hope that that they choose to make those similar types of decisions. And so if I already know that, um, why am I going to give them a hard time about it? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So
I mean, that's so awesome. And I think like I mean, most people that I've had on my podcast here that are like, I try to talk to people that are doing a decent job with this and stuff like that. And the number one thing is kind of that like opening that dialogue, right, between the students and the faculty. So like, have you like how did you present your AI usage to your students, I guess?
yeah, I mean, a lot of it's very similar to like what I've talked about in the podcast already. But more importantly, I really tried to structure it in a way of look, this is regardless of what industry you go into, right? Um, this is going to be integrated in some way, shape, or form. And the last thing that I ever want to see a student walking out of my class is that all of a sudden they don't have a tool in their tool belt. It's one thing to choose to not use the hammer, right? But when all of a sudden you got to nail something down, it's really nice to have a hammer in the belt.
Yep.
So just thinking about it in that regard, and also having the conversation with them that you know this is a very exploratory process. Like you all are coming at this from very different perspectives. Some of you have very high levels of AI literacy already. Some of you are not, right? And that's fine, right? You're all coming from different backgrounds. And now my job as the educator is to try to make sure that you are able to utilize the resources to the best of your ability that you are provided. I think there's always sort of a natural learning curve, regardless of where they fit onto that spectrum. Because oftentimes we find that the folks who are hyper literate with it, those are the ones that I tend to catch the most who aren't necessarily always prepared for that presentation question. You know what I mean? So
Okay.
that's a factor too.
And that's such an interesting point. And it's like, why do you think that is? Like, why do you think the people that are the most literate don't prepare for the presentation?
So I think a lot of it is just they've gotten extremely good at utilizing the tool, and if they're exclusively focused on efficiency and I want to spend as little time getting this done as possible, so that way I can go and do all the other things, um, you know, maybe there's a piece that just slightly gets missed in terms of their review of that paragraph or whatever the case happens to be.
And
And I think we can all acknowledge like both the humans and the technology in these situations, neither of us are perfect. And so sometimes those little things just fall through the cracks.
And
I'm guilty of it myself, right?
yeah, and I love the point that you made that like I haven't heard anyone say that. It's like often the most literate students in AI are probably the ones that are understanding the material the least. And like at times, right, give or take some situations. But inherently, why is that? It's because the educational system has put them in a place where it's like they don't are never proved on knowledge, it's just regurgitating information, right? And I think that highlights like such a huge switch that needs to happen. And then like you're teaching both people. Everyone's learning because if you're not acknowledging that this isn't a thing, then people are wrong on both ends. Not using it, right, is bad. Using it too much is bad. And when you present like, hey, we're going to talk about this, it like brings everyone kind of in the middle, whether it be learning how to use it or learning how to use it the right way, right? I don't know. I just think that's super cool. That's a very awesome point that you made. And one thing I'm really interested in is like, how have you seen your outdoor stuff like an AI come together? Because I don't think people talk about that very much.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, like one thing we're looking at a lot is, I'll give you a perfect example. So we just finished up a 90-day ad campaign revolving around our outdoor recreation business administration program,
Okay.
right? So tons of content that is hyper focused on our beautiful location, and all of the activities that the students get access to in their internships and all these kinds of things. That's an outdoor job just as much as going out and being a registered Maine guide and trying to analyze like how am I making decisions about my business? Are there different parts of the season where I might be able to change up my business model slightly? How can I utilize AI to look for those different efficiencies and save me a lot of time if I'm a solo entrepreneur, and I don't have a deep team who can just like spend a lot of time on these things. I think that's one of the most interesting parts is really allowing the small businesses within the space um, manage more things,
Yeah.
and especially once you have those tools, sometimes that makes it that much easier to then bring on that additional employee because you feel like they also have the tools to create even more economic value. So like I know that's also a big discussion too, is the hot button topic sort of around like, okay, is AI creating opportunities for more jobs? Is it taking away jobs? Like, is it somewhere in the middle? I think a lot of what it is it's going to allow folks to really ramp up their economic like input value to their organizations, or if they're the owner of the company, like their impact on the overall economy within their space. So I think there's a lot of potential positive that's in that regard, that a lot of people aren't talking about yet. And that's agnostic to whether it's the outdoors or not.
Yeah.
But because of where we are, there's a lot of small businesses in Maine that make up the outdoor recreation economy.
Yeah.
And so as folks get more in tune with all of that, it it helps us hit a number of goals that were laid out in the 10-year outdoor recreation economy roadmap that just came out a couple months ago.
Yeah.
So
And I mean, I think it's super interesting, like the concept that you're talking about, kind of, and it blends in with the big question. It's like AI is going to do all of the main jobs, these big companies and stuff like this, and it can make a one-person billion-dollar company. Like my personal opinion, I think reflects exactly what you're saying, where it's like somebody that has a rafting shop that has three guides and no marketing people and no business consultants can now learn how to do the things that they would have had to pay someone too much money that they don't end up paying and things fail. But it kind of empowers individuals, and bringing it back to your point of context engineering and like weaving things together. It's like using this stuff to do what you don't know how to do so you can do what you know how to do even better. Uh, so how have you seen that change so far? Like the like businesses you've worked with, if you have. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, we're starting to see it more and more. I was actually just at an event earlier this week, and there was a lot of conversation around this, conveniently enough, and a lot of the folks in that room were very focused on the outdoor products side of the house,
Yeah.
and so how are they making decisions about whether it's designs or whether it's their manufacturing process, or okay, great, we have the products. How do we market it? How do we distribute it? Like, there's a lot of cogs in that wheel that AI can add some grease to those things, and all of a sudden they start spinning quite a bit faster. You know what I mean? So I think that's probably the most interesting part in, thinking of just some of the businesses that I've already worked with,
Yeah.
as they're starting to unlock more and more of those almost like tiers of like, oh, I can do this too, like, and then I can do this as well, and like it it allows them to ramp up what was probably a really long-term trajectory that they were kind of looking at.
Yeah.
Um, Oftentimes it can shrink that just a little bit. Maybe it doesn't shrink it to zero, but it makes a 5-year plan now a 3-year plan, or something
Yeah.
like that.
And I think that's, again, I feel like I've said this a bunch of times on this. It's like people try to bite off the whole thing at one time. And if it doesn't make a 5-year plan, a 3-month plan, they're like, this sucks. I'm never going to use this. So how do you like help people with that? Like kind of understand that, baby steps, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, Ted Lasso probably said it best. Like, be curious, not judgmental. Like, if people are going to have
Yeah.
a lot of opposition to different things, I tend to ask more questions than throw out statements, right? And that oftentimes allows me to kind of get down to the bottom of what is the challenge that is kind of keeping us on one side of the fence or the other, and so I would probably say that, just like, um, if the sentences that you're saying, if more of them end in question marks than periods or even worse, exclamation points, like we're probably doing okay, because then we're more likely to get down to the bottom of like, what is the root concern,
Yeah.
and then how can we address that, right? Because is that a very serious concern that, maybe we have to really start thinking about different ways? Sure, but a lot of the times when you're dealing with concern, it's based off of fear, and oftentimes fear is based off of unknown. So like, how can you kind of map those things out a little bit, so now all of a sudden things are a little bit more clear?
Okay. I mean, I'm gonna steal that quote from you. But what is like, how do you stay up to date with this stuff? Because I mean, you're very literate in what we're talking about. Like, how do you, people often get overwhelmed, right, with all of the news articles and things changing. Like, how do you kind of stay realistic with it?
Yeah, I mean, I think for one, it's accepting that I'm not going to be perfect with it.
Yeah.
Like there are tons of things that I learn every single day, and whether that's like, choosing different podcasts that I'm listening to, or like, are there YouTube videos that I have playing in the background that are more audio based, and I can just kind of like absorb that information that way. I am a huge podcast guy. I mean, it was one of the reasons why I was so excited to start my own,
Mhm.
because I see the value that it really offers me in terms of sort of a lot of the multitasking that I tend to do in my life. So that allows me to use my time really effectively. But I mean, I think just understanding that this is a constantly evolving thing, and like everything else in the business world, if you think you're at the top of the mountain, it makes it that much harder to stay at the top of the mountain. And like, stagnant businesses become businesses of the past. So like, accepting that, and saying like, hey, if I can just make myself 1% better tomorrow, even without all the fun compounded growth, I'm 365% better than I was last year. You know what I mean? So you talk about small bites, like 1% is not huge.
Yeah. There's so many good one-liners in here, Austin. This is this is incredible. So kind of coming up on time, but like one thing that I think I would be interested, and I hope people listening would be interested, like, you started fresh, right? Didn't know much about it. Like, what would you recommend to someone that's like, hey, I'm excited about this, I'm curious, but I don't really know how to start?
Don't don't underestimate how little time you can start investing and getting to learn about it.
Okay.
I think a lot of people, whether it's this or plenty of other things that we do in our life, I think a lot of people just assume I have to like, I got to invest 8 hours a week for 5 weeks just to even feel like I'm remotely on the island of like understanding how this works. Like, there are so many different ways to get exposed to different resources, and for me it was just doing some exploring on like, what are the tools available, because like obviously we have all of our search based like prompt engineering stuff, and then obviously I use a fair amount of video editing related AI programming with the podcast because that also has video. So like so much of it for me early on was just like trying to understand the tools that are available, and then I can start to dive into like, okay, this is what I can actually use this for and make my use of the AI tools as efficient as possible. So.
Yeah. I mean, that's great. I think the thing I often tell people, right, is just like go start with something that you know a lot about and go kind of see what you can play around, like argue with something or do something like that.
Mhm.
But last few questions I ask everybody. If you could snap your fingers and change one thing about education, what would change after you snapped your fingers?
Ooh, that's a hot seat question. I I think okay, this connects like both my teaching role, but then also my full-time role.
Yeah.
Um, I think realistically um, it's having a really direct question about how are we making sure that the things that are going on in the classroom and are part of the educational journey are very much so designed around what is the future professional that we want walking across the stage at graduation.
Yep.
And I know I took this very seriously. Like when I was a student here at UMF, I'm a proud alum as well. And um, at the end of the day, like you are the UMF brand when you walk away from that stage and you go out into whatever that next job is. So I think taking a really strong level of responsibility and accountability that like we are part of that preparation process.
Yeah.
And so like how we're constructing our classes need to reflect that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's incredible, right? I mean, it's inherently you're producing products, right? You're helping people produce a product, which is kind of themselves. But I'm really excited for your answer to this question. I like to ask people, what's your favorite way to use AI outside of work? But it seems like outside of work is also work for you. So like I like to use it for cooking. That's like my good example. But what's out of all of the super cool things you do?
Oh man. I would say for me, uh, since this isn't technically connected to my job, I'm going to use it.
Yeah.
Um, I am a I am a huge LinkedIn guy, and like, yes, it has added benefits to many of my roles. But at the end of the day, like that's my personal brand. And so oftentimes just riffing on different things that I am kind of thinking about in my brain in whatever capacity possible. And then trying to figure out, how am I going to then create content? Because, you know, I, I imagine I am probably not the only one thinking about these various things. And unfortunately, a lot of the times those things just kind of stay in the genie bottle and no one kind of takes it out.
Yeah.
And so, like, when you have a platform like LinkedIn, it's an opportunity to just share those ideas and get perspectives. Because, like, I am never going to pretend like I appreciate you saying the word expert earlier, but like, I'm never going to call myself an expert in this or anything else, right? Because
Yeah.
there's just so much still to be learned, regardless of where you are in that journey. And so being able to throw out those ideas to other folks that are in the professional space and just riff on ideas.
Yeah. I mean, I love that. So, I mean, for everyone listening, it sounds like if you just need just about help with any sort of thing in the world, Austin is the guy for to help you out there. But Austin, thank you so much for being here. Any lasting thoughts? Any things you want to wrap it up with?
Uh, I guess I would say the same thing that I say to a lot of my students. Try to focus on sort of a cycle that's revolved around the three C's. Like, be curious about things. When you get curious about things, you tend to find ways to become competent at things. When you're confident, you get really confident. And when you're confident, it's way easier to be curious about something else. And that becomes a really cool cycle. So think about life that way. It's a lot easier.
Yeah. That's awesome. What is it? Curious, competent, confident?
Yeah,
That is amazing. Well, I think that's the best way to wrap it up. Austin, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
absolutely. Thank you so much, Zach.